goodness! These geometric storms have really ramped up, haven't they? We've had purple, pink and orange skies through the entirety of a full moon cycle. It's been most disconcerting. Although rather beautiful. We had expected a visit from our Nordic fairy friends when we saw it, but when they didn't arrive, we wondered what on earth was going on. However, I suppose it's prompted the younger fairies to practice their colour spells, which is quite nice to see. Goodness knows what's going on. I do know that great change is coming. For us all, it would seem. Anyway, let's find out about Thimble. Word had spread from as far as the pixie realm about Thimble's brave journey and Queen Lilybell's quest. But by the time it had filtered into the Whispering Caves and reached the elves, many were unsure if what they heard was not just whispers of untruth from the hunchback pixies and creatures of the dark wood. Well, yes. So they had not set all their hope on one story heard on a drifting wind. However, luckily for Thimble, elves would always find that the benefit of doubt could bring unusually surprising truths at times, and every elf in the kingdom had one eye on the lookout for the brave fairy in search of their friend, Blossom. Thane was one of the elvian warriors that dwelled in the Whispering Caves and had been out collecting shells along the banks of the River Org to make into wind chimes. Lovely. When he saw something in the calmer, low waters bobbing towards him like a limp rag. Dear. It was Thimble. Yes, I know. But I was right, wasn't I? She was battered and bruised from the strong undercurrents beating her against the river's rocky banks, and she was barely conscious. Thane acted quickly, throwing the mesh basket into the water with the material he had wrapped around his waistband tied to its handle. He was just able to scoop one of Thimble's arms into the cradle of the basket to pull her to the banks, where he was able to lift her to safety. She was as cold as ice, and Thane knew he would have to move fast and get Thimble's tiny body back into the warm. So, without haste, he ran with her in his arms to the woodland caves and nearby town of Org. Thimble was feverish, and the elves who greeted them knew they had no time to waste. Goodness me, no. Wrapping her in lots of warm woolen blankets, they laid Thimble's cold, limp body in the warmth of Thane's quarters on his wooden bed near a lit fire. Zarkia, a young elf who tended many of the unusual plants that grew amongst the stone walls of the kingdom, rushed to get Sonica. He would be sure to know how to help the fairy girl, who of course they all realised by now must be the brave Thimble. Yes, so brave. For 3 long nights, Sonica attended Thimble's bedside, chanting the old magic and spell casting over her lifeless body. Zarkia gathered strong herbs and medicinal flowers to make tinctures for Thimble to drink. Slowly there were signs that she was out of danger, and the colour returned to Thimble's cheeks, and the chanting stopped. And the relieved elves knew that all would be well for the fairy, and set about making her stay as comfortable as possible. Thimble spent much of her recovery time in the company of Thane. He would read to her and tell her about the old elvian ways of magic, and in turn, Thimble told him all about her valley and the magic she had been taught. Thane seemed particularly interested in hearing about Prunus and his abilities with flowers, and would often ask Thimble to point out the flowers amongst the rocks that reminded her of her home. They would walk together when Thimble had gained enough strength, and she loved hearing about how the Whispering Caves had been formed through an act of nature, forged over thousands of years from the River Org's waters running through the lands. How fascinating. Yes, right. In the early evenings, Thimble loved sitting in the walled gardens of the elves' caved dwellings. although the caves in this realm were not at all dark and damp like the ones you and I are familiar with. No, they were bright, warm, homely and inhabitable places, set in the contour of the valley's curves and in tiers with perfectly formed stone steps in zigzagging slats to each level. The rocks grew hardy flowers which seemed to welcome the plumage of bright leaves and petals that gave their grey faces a wash of colour. Everywhere you walked you could hear the sound of wind chimes in the breeze, which were made from wood or shells. And Thimble would have been very relaxed here indeed, were it not for the rather pressing matter of continuing on her journey. It was now past the 32nd full moon in Saturn, goodness, and the next 2 full consecutive moons would take them nearer to Neptune's moon cycle. So Thimble knew she would have to make her stay as short as possible and return to the duty of her quest. That evening, Thane joined her in her favourite place on the stony steps. His dark hair made his blue eyes shine in the setting sun, and Thimble found herself staring at him. "You are thinking of leaving us now," he said, but not as a question. It was as if he had known what Thimble had just been thinking about. "I must try and find Blossom. The thought of failing and having to go back to my valley and Faerie fills me with more dread than if I were to fall back into the River Org," said Thimble, sighing as she took in the cold evening air and her beautiful surroundings. Thane took her hand, and Thimble felt herself blush. Oh, goodness! "You will succeed, little fairy. You have a strong heart," he said, and he placed his hand to his chest. Thimble could feel his heart beating, and she suddenly felt as if she could do anything. "Thank you," she whispered. "I shall miss you when I leave. I can't thank you and Sonica enough." And she shyly took her hand away. "When you leave, Thimble, it will only be farewell. It will not be goodbye," said Thane, standing and bowing slowly. He smiled at Thimble and he left her to start making her plans to leave. Thimble pulled the map out of the bag Periwinkle had made all those days ago, which somehow seemed like so much longer to the little fairy. Well, yes, I suppose so much has happened. And placed Twig on the wall next to her. Thankfully, both were still intact after their watery encounter with the river. And although still slightly damp, Perry's words were as clear as the day he had written them, and Thimble could hear Perry's voice as she read. "The opulent opals, be careful of waterholes and the sticky bowbell plant. The flatlands, beware of trolls. They are very suspicious and will not believe you under any circumstances, so try and avoid contact at all cost." There was a small cough behind Thimble, and she turned to see Zarkia standing, waiting to see if she wanted to join her and the other elves in some supper. "Oh, I am just trying to get my affairs in order so that I can continue on my journey," said Thimble, and folded the map up and put it back in her bag. "The opulent opals are beautiful, Thimble, but the flatlands are notoriously dangerous. You should not go alone," said Zarkia, sitting down next to Thimble and picking up Twig. But Thimble had not actually ever dwelled on the danger of her journey at any point, and was certainly not about to start now. No. "I am sure I will be fine, thank you," said Thimble, taking Twig out of Zarkia's hands and putting her with the map. "I have Twig, so I'm not alone," she continued. Zarkia looked into Thimble's face and smiled. "I had not meant to pry, Fairy Brave, but I am sure if you were to ask Thane to accompany you, he would go with you to protect you on the rest of your journey? Thimble felt herself blush again. Oh, I'm sure he has enough to worry about without having to think about me, she said, standing up and brushing the petals off her lap, which had fallen from the walls. Zarkia picked a closed blue flower bud from one of the plants next to her and placed it in Thimble's hands. These flowers are always closed, but it is believed when we are in the company of the one we are betrothed to, they open their faces, Thimble. Thimble took the gift and smiled. The truth was there would be nothing more she would like than to ask Thane to accompany her on the rest of her journey. However, she knew that that would go against the terms of her quest, set by Queen Lilibel. So asking him was out of the question. But somehow, Thimble knew that Thane probably already knew this, as he seemed to be so knowing. Oh! Well, those are the calling birds. Well, they came around quite quickly. I think these geometric storms are really, really affecting everybody. Goodness knows we've all felt quite strange recently in our realm. Anyway, I'm so glad Thimble's feeling better. I know you shall want to come back and find out where she goes next. Doesn't sound like she's staying with the elves for much longer. Now, whatever you do, take care. Be careful of these geometric storms. And don't stop believing, especially in you.